In this next conversation, I am honored to be able to sit down with Congressmember Jennifer McClellan, who represents Virginia's 4th Congressional District. Please give her a warm welcome. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We are very honored to have several members of Congress joining us this week, so we appreciate it.
Thank you.
I want to dig right into it and ask you about some actions by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. They recently announced that they want to end a program that requires large polluters to report their greenhouse gas emissions. And the agency's administrator, Lee Zeldin, calls the program nothing more than bureaucratic red tape. And I'd love to hear how you would respond to the administrator.
Well, everything that they call administrative red tape was put in place to solve a problem. And people cannot, I grew up in the 70s in the middle of not only an energy crisis, but back when rivers were on fire, when you couldn't breathe the air. And everybody wants to do the right thing to reduce emissions and to protect our planet. But the first way to do that is to collect the data and respond to the data, and where necessary, adjust behavior. And this is a larger pattern of the current administration, not just on environmental issues, but across the board, to eliminate the data. And it's dangerous.
It's dangerous.
And I and other members of Congress are really pushing back, and we need people to help us.
A lot of courage is needed right now, and I wonder how you and your fellow legislators are coming together to have that courage, because it's scary. I think a lot of people are very scared right now.
It is a scary time, and I think I'm a history nerd, and the history of our country has been, how do we both reconcile the ideals upon which our country was founded and the reality upon which it was founded, and how do we make those ideals true for everybody? And we've made tremendous progress, but every time there's progress, there's a backlash.
Right.
And we are in the backlash, but the first step is to realize, number one, we're in the backlash, but number two, we've always come out of the backlash. And if we stay focused, if we, I guess I'm following sort of 4 mantras this year to get me through. Number one, put your own mask on first.
Yep.
Because if you are not taking care of yourself and feeling what you feel and acknowledge it, then you can't do anything to protect our environment, to protect public health, to protect our democracy.
Right.
Number two, focus on what you can control and try to let go of the rest. Now, the second part is hard, but I think all of us, there's enough within our control to at least fill our day.
Right.
And then you take that first step, and then you keep going. Celebrate, get some joy in there and celebrate the victories, and then recognize you got to fight to protect them.
Right.
So I think at the end of the day, in this very scary moment for our country, we need to acknowledge that, but we also need to say it's been worse. But it won't be as bad this time if we all resolve to move forward.
Yeah, it's really good advice. I interviewed my Senator Also Brooks several months ago, and she recognized that need for self-care, and I think that's important. But what I worry about, Congressmember, is that when President Trump signed the One Big Beautiful Bill into law, I hate saying that, the bill shifts more costs from Medicaid and SNAP programs to states. People are going to suffer. They can't practice self-care like I can or you can.
Yeah, I call it the big ugly bill. And it does so much more than that. People forget Medicaid is popular. The Affordable Care Act is popular because everyone wants access to health insurance, and to know if you get sick, you can get the care you need without going bankrupt, or you can get the preventative care you need not to get sick in the first place. Food assistance is popular. And so the more people hear about this bill, the more they begin to push back against it, which is, my colleagues that voted for it are now starting to see, oh, that probably was a mistake.
Yeah.
And so I go back to what I just said a minute ago about how it's up to each one of us and how members of Congress, we need the people's help, because in a government by, of, and for the people, government will only reflect the perspective of and therefore meet the needs of the people who participate. And the more people who are upset by these cuts make their voices heard, it may feel like you're just shouting into the wilderness, but it is starting to have an impact. And making sure that you are telling your stories about how these policies will impact you and your communities. And then for us, making sure that we are amplifying those stories is critically important. But it's, over 15 million people could lose access to their health insurance. But they're still going to get sick.
Yeah.
And when they get sick and show up in the hospital, they're going to get care. And oftentimes they're going to show up when it's more expensive or in some cases too late to treat. We all pay for that. As our insurance premiums, as our cost of care goes up, and as more and more providers who are already operating on the margins, especially in rural communities, close their doors. And in many of these areas, they're the largest employer. And then that begins a cycle. Oh, by the way, this is the same population of people who are going to lose their Medicaid who are on food assistance. So you're going to lose your food assistance, you're going to lose your Medicaid. And some of the funding bills that we're debating right now, they could lose their rental or housing assistance.
Right.
And so I go back, look, I'm a preacher's daughter. And so I go back and I kept thinking throughout the debate, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was, homeless, you housed me. When I was a stranger, you welcomed me. And that's not what that bill does.
Yeah.
But we have got to stay focused as a society on saying we want to care for the least of these, because we understand caring for the least of these is how we care for ourselves and each other.
Sure.
And we just can't give up on pushing to undo these cuts.
Yeah, we can't give up, but at the same time, the Make America Healthy Again folks are say they want to prioritize children's health, yet they're cutting vaccines, they're cutting SNAP. It's really hard to respond to that. And I know you want the stories from citizens so that Congress can share those stories, among themselves. But what are we supposed to do when all of these cuts are happening and we don't have a lot of power anymore?
You ultimately do. I know it doesn't seem like it, but it's raising your voice and speaking to your elected representatives at all levels of government, not just Congress, because the decisions that Congress make impacts your state and your local elected officials. So making your voice heard at the ballot box, making your voices heard at the public hearings, when they're debating these bills, is important, because what I have seen, this president loses quietly. He retreats quietly, but he does lose in court, and he does retreat when he gets enough pressure. And I think, I'm also a child of parents who lived through the civil rights movement. When moments are at their darkest, if you give up and say, well, I'm powerless, there is no hope, then you are lost. And when my parents grew up during the Depression under the tyranny of Jim Crow, there were many times when they could have said, I have no power, I give up. But they and their communities pushed forward and said, I do have power, because the promises of our foundational documents that created this government were based on the idea that power of government derives from the people. So the people have to use that power, and they can't give it up. And there are many different ways that you can do it, but the first step is to vote. Even if you're like, there are a lot of people who say, I don't like these candidates, so I'm not going to vote. You're not voting just for a candidate. You're voting for who are they going to appoint to positions, who's going to set the agenda, And it doesn't end with voting, because you have got to make sure that your elected officials know how what they're doing will impact your life. And then part of it is on us as your representative to very clearly explain, here is what your government is doing and why, and empowering you to be able to speak up by knowing what we're doing. And I know that all sounds impossible in this moment. But this conversation right now and the fact that all of these people are in this room shows that you haven't given up yet. And I just, dig in, focus on what you can control, focus on where you can use your voice, where you can use your power. And if enough people do that, I think we will come through this.
Yeah, it's good advice to say it doesn't end with voting. That has to be something all of us as citizens, really take on. Soon our country is going to celebrate its 250th anniversary. And you said this could either be a celebration or a wake. How can we make it a celebration?
Speak up. I talked about it a little bit, but when the very foundation of a free society is under attack, and that's free speech and free press, the right to vote, the right to assembly, if you are complicit, if you are silent, then you are also complicit in the erosion of liberty. And so I think it is important to speak up, to use your voice, and to use your power. Because, again, the power of government is derived from the people. And if we just refuse to use our power and sit back and say, I don't like what's happening, what's happening doesn't affect me. It may not affect you in the moment, but it ultimately will affect you because again, the loss of free speech, the loss of a free press, ultimately will lead to the destruction of our republic.
Right. You mentioned the importance of joy before, and keeping that alive. I wonder what the ways you're doing that in your personal life and your professional life.
Well, I learned how to meditate last year. That helps.
Nice.
I have young kids. I have a 15-year-old son, a 10-year-old daughter, and when COVID hit, my daughter thought she was going to be a YouTube star. And she recorded a video on my phone where she talked about how hard COVID was, and she couldn't play with her friends. But she ended with, get some joy in there.
Yeah.
And so for me, sometimes that joy is in my kids. Sometimes it's, binge watching, I don't know, Bridgerton or some, whatever show that just gets me out of the moment. But frankly, a lot of times what brings me joy is putting my phone down and going out and touching grass and not allowing an algorithm that feeds and thrives off of people hating each other.
Right, and fear.
I just don't participate in going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I think when you going back to sort of the principles of my faith, like I try to root everything in love. And if I find myself hating something or hating someone, I just walk away and focus my attention on what is it that brings me joy, what is it that sort of lights that spark that then allows me to look at that person and say, you know what? Even you I love. That's a hard thing to do. But, as Dr. King said, I choose love because hate is too great a burden to bear. And physically and emotionally and spiritually, rooting myself in love, starting with, just love of myself and taking care of myself, allows me to stay focused on doing work for communities that I love.
Right.
And helps me move forward.
Yeah, rejecting hate, rejecting violence. That's so important right now. Thank you, Congressmember.
Thank you.
What a delight to talk to
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
You.